There's been rumors going around that in Marvel Rivals, the higher your frame rate, the more movement speed you may get, or the more damage you may do. Now, I wanted to completely figure out exactly what's going on and find out the truth. Are you really getting higher level movement or more damage per second when you have faster frame rate? Because that does sound like quite an issue for the game. Now, I had to break this down and test it thoroughly across many different things to find out the truth. Now, you may have seen this clip online where Doctor Strange moves further when you have higher frames per second, or Star-Lord finishes killing somebody with his ultimate faster if you have higher frames. So, how much of this is really true, and what does this really change in terms of gameplay? And can we say that having higher frame rates is going to win you more games? Well, I've gone through a few different things to test out. First things first, yes, there are absolutely some differences, and I tested this first with Doctor Strange because to me, this is where the biggest, most noticeable difference can be seen. When you press your jump in the air ability and move to the side, if you have 30 frames per second, you get almost no horizontal movement, whereas if you have 120 frames per second, you have a lot more horizontal movement. So yeah, it's very clear something's going on. And to make sure that it's not just some weird client-side thing in the firing range, I did jump into a quick match and found out the same results. If you have higher frame rate, you move further with Doctor Strange abilities. Now, I did do a lot of testing for many other abilities, and I did find some weird things happening through different frame rates. However, they're mostly pretty much unnoticeable. The only major edge case really is this Doctor Strange tech, where at 30 frames per second, you get no horizontal movement, and you'll keep getting more and more horizontal movement, all of the way up to 240 frames, where you can go 15 meters horizontally. And with more frames, you'll gradually get further and further towards that 15 meters, and honestly, I don't know why, because all of the other things that I've tested, and you'll see in a minute, have some differences, but they cap out at 120 frames. So this is some weird Doctor Strange tech that makes almost no sense. But anyway, let's take a closer look at the other weird things happening at different frame rates. Well, I first took a look at Star-Lord's ultimate, because that was one of the abilities that we saw a clip about online. With Star-Lord's ultimate at 30 frames per second, you will kill a player in 1.44 seconds. I tested this multiple times, and I still got the same results each and every time. If you kill a player with 60 frames per second, it takes, guess what, 1.39 seconds. So yes, it does become slightly faster. 90 FPS, it's 1.36 seconds, and 120 FPS, it's 1.35, where it caps out. This is the damage per second you should be doing. In the grand scheme of things, this means if you have higher frame rate, you're going to be killing a player 6% faster. 6% less time taken to kill a player if you have 120 FPS or higher versus 30 FPS. As long as you get 60 FPS or more, the difference is going to be almost non-noticeable. And honestly, I think the difference even between 30 FPS and 120 FPS for this case is pretty much no difference. Now, I tried this with a few other abilities and weapons. Iron Man's Unibeam, for example, had absolutely no difference no matter the frame rate. Punisher's main assault rifle seemed to have very small differences, with the 30 FPS being 1.38 seconds to kill a player, and 120 FPS being 1.35. So it was really, we're talking milliseconds here. It really is a very, very small difference. And I honestly can't even tell if on the server, if it would have made any difference at all whatsoever with something like this. It probably is the same. Something like Cloak and Dagger, which locks onto the target in a similar way to Star-Lord's ultimate, is exactly the same, no matter what frame rate you're running. Now here's another really weird one. Magik's dash does change based on frame rate. It turns out, if you have 30 frames per second, you're going to lose a couple meters on your dash. I perfectly lined this up and tested it many times across different frame rates, and at 30 FPS, you're going to be losing out on a couple meters, which could mean you're going to miss out on the dash attack combo. Now, once again, once you've got 60 frames or higher, you seem to be pretty much good to go, and we can test on the website. Magik's supposed to dash 16 meters. It's not supposed to be 15 or 14, whatever this ends up being, so something weird is going on there. Now, besides that, everything else seems to be mostly the same. Winter Soldier's abilities don't seem to change. You can't grapple people at a further distance on higher frame rate. Iron Fist does not get better movement speed. And from what I can tell, all of the weapons seem to be doing about the same amount of damage. There is one more major offender we do need to talk about, and that is this combo with Wolverine. I'm going to show you it first on 120 FPS and then 30 FPS, because you'll be able to notice the difference immediately without even getting the stats. So check this out, right? That's how long it took me to kill Groot with 120 FPS. Now pay attention to what happens with 30.
You're mine.
Did you see at the end there? The animation ended sooner. So when you do this attack, you activate Berserk Claws. Okay? Now, for some reason, on lower FPS, it ends the animation sooner, which means you then go back to the normal attack and you get this gap every 4 attacks, and the combo with lower FPS ends at a point where you basically get this gap before you've killed Groot.
Eyes on some bogeys.
With higher frames per second, you wouldn't get that gap. You would have killed Groot before you get this gap between the 4 strikes. In terms of pure stats, if you are on 30 FPS versus 60, you're going to lose an entire second of time taking down Groot with this combo. 1 whole second. If you're on 120 FPS, you'll save a 1.1 seconds. So just a tiny bit longer. An extra 10% faster kill speed when you have 120 FPS. So from all of my tests so far, it seems that you get the most beneficial changes when you go from 30 to 60 FPS. That's when things start to be a little less janky, whether it's DPS or movement. Everything gets a little bit weird when it's at 30 FPS. At 60, things are pretty much perfect, but not quite. And as you scale your way up towards 120, it seems that you get closer and closer to the real stats of whatever DPS or movement distance is supposed to happen. And then when you do hit that crisp 120, anything above that doesn't change anything. I've tested it all the way up to like 400 frames by going into really low resolution, and no difference there whatsoever. So as long as you've got 120 frames per second or higher, everything in the game will work as intended. If you've got anything below 120 FPS, you may notice some weird jankiness here or there for some abilities. Not most of them, just a few. And the difference is hardly noticeable unless you start to go below 60 frames per second. With some weird edge cases like the Doctor Strange movement when he uses his shift ability. Now, in the grand scheme of things, is this going to lose you games? Well, the honest truth is, even if this weird jankiness didn't happen from low frame rates, having low frame rates is going to make you have a hard time winning games anyway. And as unfortunate as it is, playing a competitive game with so much going on around you is going to be so much substantially more difficult when you have lower frame rate. So whatever you can do to increase your frame rate, if you want to play better, it's absolutely worth doing. Not only because you're going to have a better time at competing against enemies, but it's just more enjoyable. Playing on low frame rates is rough. I know what it's like. I've been there in the past, but if you can get higher frame rates, then absolutely try it. It's well worth doing. I thought I'd end this video with a quick look at the settings you should run to get the highest frame rate. Firstly, frame generation mode needs to go off. The easiest way to explain this is it's basically fake frames, and they actually add input lag to your PC. And most importantly, let's say you got 30 FPS, right? You got 30 FPS, and you want to try and do this Doctor Strange tech, right? And you go like this. You don't get the movement. You go here, you get 5 meters, okay? Now, if we turn on this, right? Let's put on this frame generation. Now, magically, we've got 60 FPS, but look at what happens. We get the same movement. We only go 5 meters. So, even though it's saying we've got 60 FPS, even the game itself is still running at 30 FPS. Your GPU or CPU is essentially just adding extra frames in. Because look what happens when you actually have real 60 frames. This is what actually happens when you have real 60 frames here. We turn this off, right? And now we do the jump. Oh, we go a lot further, right? So make sure to turn this off. This is not good, and it doesn't help. The game's engine is still running at whatever frame rate is set here. So first things first, we want to try and aim for at least 120 FPS. To do that, best thing you can do is go low, obviously, but make sure you click low quality on here and screen space reflections as well. These two are going to eat your frames like crazy. So low everything, and besides that, you can turn this on for better performance, and low latency mode if you've got an NVIDIA graphics card. Super resolution sharpening is a very, very important thing that you may be overlooking. Put this on ultra performance and scale this down to 0. It's going to make your game look like a potato, but it will help massively. So there it is. Hopefully you can get some better frames, and honestly, in the grand scheme of things, the difference in having higher frame rate is going to mean more than the weird jankiness that the game has at high frame rate. Like, just getting better frame rates is going to help anyway, you know, whatever game you're playing. Unless you're playing Doctor Strange, and then, well,
Our enemies are near.
you can do this, which is just extremely weird. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments. Cheerio.